Welcome guys to this video about the Interbellum Public Career Builder. In this video, we're going to tell you some information that you can glean from the builder that you may not know, and a little bit about each component, and some things that go into each class. For the most part, everything I'm going to talk about is universal to everything on this builder, but I am going to use the Chosen for my template here, just because it has a pretty much everything that I would talk about. So these first two rows on every single one of these trees are things that you get for free when you start that hard specialization. And the reason why they're showed here is because a lot of passives and tactics will use those, and we wanted to show you guys what the abilities themselves will be getting. You can only put points into one set of these on the live server. So you can't put points in this tree and then put points in this tree and points in this tree. Basically, you choose one of these. Whenever you first create your character, this hard specialization on the left is the one that you will have on every single one of the classes. It's the one on the left is the one that you have access to starting at level 1. This is the one that you will have access to throughout the entirety of tier tutorial, and you will not have access to the other two specializations. So for this first specialization here, the order of the abilities on the top here is the order of the order of a level of obtainment of the abilities, which means that, like, if you chose a chosen, if you chose a chosen for your character, you would start as a Blight King, and you would start with the ability Blow, and you would gain Corruption, then Seeping Wound, then Guard, then Tooth of Tzinch, then Wither, Ravage, and Shifting Carapace. The first node here is usually the class mechanic. It is almost always the same for all three hard specializations. We also generally include information here that is useful to know, even if it's not necessarily part of your hard specializations mechanic. For example, the Bride of Cain tells you the bleeding status effect for Witch Elf in this node, even though the actual mechanic is Bloodlust. But then the next 8 are your core abilities, and every single class has 8 core abilities. A handful of classes can get an additional ability, and if or more as base. Most of the time, this will be on this node. A good example is Shadow Warrior gets, or Archers get 3 additional abilities. Their stances. Are you going to load? Probably not. They get 3 additional abilities that are all put on here because they all have the same cooldown. They're all off the GCD. But your 8 core abilities are always here. You always have 8 no matter what. Just a handful of people have more. These first 2 tactics here, which you get for free, are your racial tactics. Most of the time, one of these it works well with other racial tactics. So, for example, most Chaos classes spread corruption to themselves, their enemies, and a little bit to their allies, and every single Chaos unit has something that makes them immune to the negative effects of corruption, so that if you're with other Chaos units and those corruption values start getting high, running this is probably very valuable to you because you have a lot of corruption around. And then the other one is always just, it's something to do with the flavor of the class, either from the tabletop or from the racial tactics that existed in Mythic's version of Warhammer Online. The next 2 tactics are class tactics, so they are always the same for all 3 hard specializations of that particular class. Under most circumstances, they function to make your gameplay loop or your mechanic simpler, so that it is easier to play, and that's why they're given to you for free. So for the example of Chosen here, where rely on consuming corruption from enemy targets in order to apply some of their more powerful abilities, you get one effect that applies random corruption around you so that enemies around you are getting corruption so that you can use it even if you aren't applying it through other ways. Whereas their second class tactic lowers the cooldown on their defensive that every single one of these chosens have. In general, these 4 tactics are designed to be lesser power than the tactics that are in the tree, but more generalized. So while these might be more specific, they do cost a point, and you also have a opportunity cost of basically how far down they are. These are usually more potent, they are given more value, and they're designed to be less generically useful. Usually by the time that you're willing to actually start putting these tactics, you don't need these class tactics as a crutch for your class as much at that point. This next node, which you'll never see on the actual in-game mastery tree, but it is just here to tell people what weapons that particular specialization equips. That way I don't have to people asking me, oh, what weapon does a Doom Knight equip? On the internal version of this builder, there is artwork that is behind these, but we don't own any of that artwork, which is why the public builder currently does not have any until such point in time that we obtain artists that give us material that is not owned by Games Workshop or someone that we do not have a license from in order to use the artwork. But that's what this node is for. These next 4 are your free adrenaline abilities. They are determined by the role that your hard specialization is aiming for. So like these are the tank adrenaline skills. These are the melee adrenaline skills, and this one and these 2 are support adrenaline skills. That's one of the reasons why I was going to use the Chosen, because you got tank, you got a melee DPS, and you've got a support, but you also have a tank morale or adrenaline skill for the support, because normally what's for support adrenaline 2 is focused mind, but Doom Knight does not have any long cast spells to get use out of focused mind, and they play similar to a tank, and they're also melee support. So they were given the Champions Challenge, which is normally a tank adrenaline 2. These 9 nodes right here, these four, and this one are the same in every single tree. Now, the ranks can be different. Like this one's got 5, this one has 3, and this one has 5 for each individual, but altogether, all 9 of them will total to 25. These function as your base stats. It is almost impossible to get down this tree without having taken at least 1 or 2 nodes from these stats. This also allows you to get more stats in favor of losing certain abilities, tactics, and passive options, and it functions to let people make up for deficiencies that they may find in their gear, because the gear is random, right? The reason that they always equal to 25 is so between all 9 of them is so that they're always the same, and that the rest of the tree has a specific number of points in it. And what determines the maximum amount for these ranks is the class or the race the class belongs to, whether what it uses to deter what stat it primarily uses for increasing its ability, so whether it's melee attack power, range attack power, spell attack power, or restoration power. And of course, there's mixes in between those. What role it is, and something else that I currently don't remember. But yeah, those 9 are always basically in the same spot. The only difference is that they have different ranks. Now, they do have diminishing returns. So, like, if this one's got 1 point for 100, the second point gives 85 total. The third point gives 70 total. So, even if someone might have, 5 toughness versus your 4, that fifth point isn't really worth a whole lot. And it's mostly just for those people that really, really, really want to get that extra little oomph in the stat that they want. On a random side note, you do have 100 of every single primary stat given to you for free, except for wounds, because you're given 6,000 health for free. That has nothing to do with your wounds. And the reason for that is so that negative stat modifiers like reduced strength, for example, still affect you. So your stats are not started at 0, they are started at 100. This middle node on the very first tree for every single one of them is designated as what we call a mechanic or sub-mechanic passive. These are almost always different between the individual hard specializations, and they function to facilitate that particular hard specialization in a direction. So, for example, with Blight Kings here, which are Nurgle chosen, this particular mechanic or their sub-mechanic passive causes their primary action point spending ability to spread corruption, Nurgle corruption, to themselves and to their enemy. That way, they can apply more seeping wounds more often, and also use more asymptomatic carrier. Whereas if you go to Gore Chosen, it is basically whenever you are using corruption and you're getting these random versions, whenever you get non-clone corruption, you can consume it because you don't really care as a melee DPS about the benefits of like Nurgle corruption and Tzeentch corruption. Like, you don't really get much benefit out of them, so you are consuming them in order to make your next ability do damage. And then like Doom Knight is applying Tzeentch corruption because they do have a lot of cooldowns and such, and they can benefit from Tzeentch corruption. The next two rows are generally pretty generic, just filling out the differences between the 25 stat nodes. You will generally find your first AoE ability, if your hard specialization has one. Most do. But you'll generally find your primary AoE ability on the second row. If you're a DPS, you will always find one there, because DPS get that little thing related to it. This particular tactic right here is a arc type tactic. So this is based on whether or not you are a tank-ish type character, a melee character, a ranged character, or if you are a character that uses a lot of abilities that can target allies, which doesn't necessarily mean you're a healer. And this one is basically assigned by that, which means most tanks it's stabilized, most melee DPS it's fleet-footed, most ranged DPS it's far-sighted. These four are, this one right here is a Adrenaline 3 that is based off of your race. So you get 2 racial tactics and 1 racial adrenaline skill. They are the same for each particular race, and they go with the theme of the racial tactics and the general theme of the race itself. These other 3 is Adrenaline, Adrenaline 2, Adrenaline 4. These are technically provided by your hard specialization. Right now, a fair number of them are just copied among all hard specializations. But as you can see here on Chosen, for example, the touch will not be on Gore Chosen and Doom Knight. We just haven't gotten around to actually designating this yet. Career tactics, like I said earlier, are generally better, but sometimes more specific than the core tactics that you get above. There are always 4 additional abilities in this section right here. These 2 and these these three and this one. Um, there isn't a whole lot that determines what is required to go in this section right here. It mostly is just whatever makes the particular hard specialization more like itself, if that makes sense. So like, this is the wave of Nurgle because it makes the wave of chaos do more Nurgle oriented stuff. This is seeping wound benefits because it's the Nurgle ability. Um, and that's the general idea there. It's just like making the hard specialization more specialized towards what we're wanting it to do, flavor wise and role wise. At the end here, there's always a renown tactic, which is there are 5 different ones. These are based off what makes most sense for this particular hard specialization. So there is one that is based off of having guard. So if you have guard in your hard specialization, you'll likely get masochist, which means that whenever you've got your guard active and you're being hit, that you're gaining adrenaline. So aka you get more adrenaline skills for being a tank. You've got Verge of Victory, which is for usually for DPS oriented specs that are more likely to get killing blows. You have Dissipation Expert, which is oftentimes for classes that can dispel offensively or defensively, so that they're getting adrenaline for actively using their dispels. You have what's the other one? I'm missing one. You have Loved by All, which makes you we got Break Loose, which is for classes that have movement skills like charge and charge and pounce and technically even stalk, where you can get out of ensnared and rooted by using them. And then you have Loved by All, which makes you always have a movable. Which, if you come look at Repel, where is Repel? Or Dismiss, sorry. If movable makes you immune to knockback, pulls, and rooted. So with Loved by All, you always have that, but your mass is reduced by 2, so you can't CC as well. Also, because all core renowned tactics are related to generating adrenaline. If you take Loved by All, you're also having the opportunity cost of having less adrenaline skills as well. The last tier here is impossible to get both. There's 31 points in this tree. Every single tree there's 31 points, which means once you get down to the bottom... Actually, I forgot one thing. So the last passive right here is called the capstone passive. And no, that's not that one. It's called the capstone passive, and that is not a very interesting one. We'll do that one. So a capstone passive is something that... Actually, you know what? This is interesting. It just requires a lot of knowledge of blanking. This one does not. So a capstone passive is one that, at the end of bringing everything together, it makes it more powerful. And when you get to this tier right here, you only have 6 points left. So you have to choose between this Adrenaline 4, this Renown tactic, usually one of your best career tactics, one of your best abilities, and 4 points in this passive. And usually right around here is when a large number of the really hard choices getting into play. And the reason that this has 4 points is because that's 5, 6, 7, 8, and you're always going to basically leave out 3 components up at this level. And that makes it very difficult for most people. Also, this passive, under most circumstances, gets better the more points you put into it. So 0.1 will be less valuable than, say, 0.4. If I go... Where is it? Pretty sure it's the case on Archer. Lion. Yeah, that'll work. So, to showcase an example, just throwing points in here in order to get down. So this is 5%, then 14, then 27, then 45. So just even putting 1 point loss in here is so much less of a more of a loss than originally. And that makes it very difficult when you get down to this point. And we get a lot of people who are like, oh man, I just really can't spend all the points that I want, which is the whole idea of this entire tree. And basically we balance almost everything based off of opportunity cost. So something can seem extraordinarily powerful because you're always giving up something for it. And that's where we get down to this very last thing. You have 2 capstone abilities. You have 1 capstone ability that is very good for your class, making it function in small scale combat up to medium combat, up against your Zerg busting skill. Now, in pretty much every single scenario and like we pretty much expect everybody to have the left side capstone for their own personal performance, right? But in the open field, when you've got people who are specializing in Zerg busting, they can be countered themselves by people who are by small groups that are not specializing in Zerg busting and specialize in hunting them down. So you have to give up something even for that Zerg busting skill. And that is a general concept. A couple other things here. The second and third trees are earned through a quest line that are opened up. We haven't decided fully on the levels, but I know they're both after tier tutorial. So you'll only ever see the ones on the left in tier tutorial. The other 2 open up in tier plus. Every single scenario and save point in RVR campaigns has the ability to respec. Respecking inside of your hard specialization will always be free. It costs you nothing to change what points you have assigned to all these. So if you decide, if you go into a scenario and you're currently set up for mass AoE and Zerg busting on all this stuff, you can just talk to the guy right where you spawn, change your spec, and change to a scenario based spec, and actually have your other capstone, right? Same thing if you walk out into the RVR lake in your war camp or your chapter camp that you can spawn in. You can change your spec, or if you decide that what you're currently running into out in the field is not working, you can come back and you can change it. Changing your inside your hard specialization costs you nothing. Changing to another hard specialization costs you something. We're not sure yet what that will cost. But the idea is that changing who you are is costly. Changing how you do what you do is not that. Also, remember you can change tactics in combat. So it makes putting points in this even more, because you get 4 for free, right? But you'd be like, oh, I might only buy one or 2 tactics to replace them. But if you actually, for example, maybe you don't need improved distract at all points, right? But you can still buy it so that the one time you need it, you can swap to it as you're going into a large-scale fight. And you can make your build a little more modular at the expense of spending points where you're not getting value out of them at the moment. And this causes a system that, because of all of the opportunity costs, makes it easier to allow for things to be really fun and over the top, but not oppressive to the game system in general. And that's why we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on the things that people have seen on the builder. And I hope that this explains a little bit how we build each class as we've gone through them. I hope it explains what you've been seeing on the builder. Also, all the tooltip, I meant to go over this. There is some information on this tooltip on the builder that you would not see in game, and that was another reason I chosen. So on the top here where it says skill, spell, or ability, that is basically just a designator of whether or not it is affected by a disarm or a silence. If it's a skill and you're disarmed, it will be disabled. If it's a spell and you're silenced, it will be disabled. If it's an ability, it's not disabled by either. If you're knocked down, it disables all three, so it disables all skills, all spells, all abilities. And every single component of a tooltip is supposed to be as accurate as possible. So, for example, this knockback applies immovable, which is basically the immunity for knockbacks, right? This one does not say that it applies immovable, so therefore it does not provide the knockback, which is why this A3, which is basically just a AoE knockback, is more powerful than you think because it isn't providing that knockback immunity when you're knocking them back, and that's why it's an A3 instead of just like an A1. So tooltip, if it's not on the tooltip, it's probably not there. Even things like internal cooldowns are listed, so it'll say 1 second ICD, or it'll say this effect can only happen every 1 second. So for the most part, tooltip clarity is extraordinarily important. And when you ask me a question, like if the tooltip is not clarifying this, I will fix it. Like it's extraordinarily important to us. So please ask those questions. I have been adjusting things on the builders as people have been asking me. I also make those adjustments in the client themselves, so that when you guys are in game, what you're seeing on the builder is what you're going to be seeing on our tests. I have no idea how long this video has been, but I'm pretty sure I've covered everything I wanted to. So I hope you guys are enjoying the builder, continue to enjoy the builder, and please continue giving us more feedback on it so we can make it better, we can make the classes better, we can make the tooltips better, and we can have a really good game as we go. Thank you guys.